Well, it's been a few weeks since I've been up here, and frankly, I'm not really sure that I am fully ready to be back here with you like this. But I also figured it's worth a shot. I was talking to Doug Mauss this week, and he said, "Yeah, it's kind of like in the original Top Gun movie. They said we got to get Maverick up there as soon as possible again after his accident." And I thought, if it works for Maverick, then maybe it'll work for me. Although I think that first flight back wasn't very glamorous, so we'll see how all this goes. It's been a hard several weeks. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I think most of you do. Almost 7 weeks ago, we lost a beloved leader here at Pathfinder, Chris Toomey, who is also my best friend. And so it has just been a really, really difficult time. And in the present moment, and I always bring my authentic self to you when I'm here. In the present moment, I'll be honest that I've been dealing with, battling a lot of despair and a lot of loneliness, which I am convinced are two of the most awful emotions in the world. And today I promise you that this won't be all about grief, it won't all be about Chris, but I do want you to join me where I have been for a moment, just for a moment. I want you to sit with me in those feelings that we have all experienced before, feelings of despair and loneliness. Despair is simply defined as a loss of all hope. And I know as Christians, if that's who you are, we're supposed to be people who always have hope, but sometimes hope is hard to find. When you lose someone you really care about, or you're going through some other hard season, when you don't feel a sense of agency in your life, where you don't feel like you've got the power to change your circumstances or your relationship. When you feel like in life your best days are behind you rather than ahead of you and the future is bleak, it's easy to become hopeless, isn't it? It's easy to battle despair. And so I want you just to think about a moment in your life. Maybe that's far away, maybe it's really near. Think about a moment where you had to encounter or you're battling with despair. And now think about loneliness. Loneliness is not the same thing as being alone. You can be alone and not feel lonely, and you can be surrounded by people and feel very, very, very lonely. And loneliness is one of the most just debilitating feelings in the world. It's a plague on our society right now. You want to talk about the real pandemic of the last 40 years? It is a pandemic of loneliness and isolation. In fact, do you know that chronic loneliness, in terms of health outcomes alone, chronic loneliness is worse on your health than smoking 15 cigarettes a day? So you ex-smokers, I guess you can go get a bunch of friends and you can smoke and you're better off than being alone and being a non-smoker. Loneliness, chronic loneliness is worse on your health. I was joking, some of you guys need to lighten up, okay? Chronic loneliness is worse. I'm the one who's grieving, I don't know what's wrong with you, so lighten up, come on. Chronic loneliness is worse on your health than obesity. It's a verified detriment to your physical health. And you know what it's like to be lonely. You understand. See, despair and loneliness, those things have been my reality, but they've been a lot of our realities, and they're awful, aren't they? Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's important for us to grapple with something. It's important for us to understand this, that loneliness and despair, isolation and hopelessness, those are the natural trajectory of life in this world. The longer you live, you'll encounter betrayal, you'll encounter rejection, you will encounter loss, you will lose people who matter to you. Things will happen to you, you'll encounter pain in this life. And the natural trajectory of life in this world is to leave you in a place of despair and loneliness, unless something else intervenes. Right, the natural trajectory is to leave you in a place of despair and loneliness unless something intervenes. Newton's first law of motion says an object in motion stays in motion unless it is acted upon by an outside force. Unfortunately, the outside force is this man's face with a soccer ball flying at it. You can tell he's middle-aged because there's all that extra room there. It's what happens to us, right? An object in motion stays in motion unless it's acted upon by an outside force. The natural trajectory of life in this world is to leave us in a place of despair and hopelessness unless an outside force intervenes. For us, what is the outside force? Thank God it's not our face. What is the outside force? The outside force is Jesus and his inbreaking kingdom, his reign and rule that he brought into the world when he walked the earth. You see, when Jesus came into the world, he came to do one thing. He came to set a collision course. He came to play chicken with the natural trajectory of life in this world. He came to take despair and loneliness and to go at them head on in a game of epic chicken. And the reality is neither side was willing to yield. And so there was this great collision that happened on a day called Good Friday. You've heard of it? And on that day, it was a mess. There was wreckage. Everything was wrong. But when the dust cleared and they cleared the wreckage on Easter Sunday, who won? You been to an Easter service? Yeah, Jesus won, right? Jesus won. But you know what that means? That means that Jesus has come to collide with the natural trajectory of this world. That means that despair and loneliness don't get to win anymore. At the end of the day, Jesus wins, and all that Jesus brings can be our reality now. We are not condemned to a life of despair and loneliness. We have hope and life and joy and all of those things back again. And you see, that's what I've been grabbing onto over the last several weeks. That's the only hope for living. But I want you to know that's not just an abstract theological concept. This is the reality then of the rest of the Bible and the rest of time. You see, after Jesus rises again, there's a whole lot more Bible in the New Testament that explains what this actually looks like. That something has come into our world and it has gotten in the way of the natural trajectory of things, and now we're not victims of despair and loneliness anymore. Today we're gonna look at the book of Acts. This is where it all starts, Acts chapter 16. And what I want you to see from Acts chapter 16 is you're gonna meet several Pathfinders of the past. People who are walking this journey of faith, living in the hope of Jesus in spite of really difficult circumstances. They are at war against the natural trajectory to despair, of despair and loneliness. And we're gonna meet some of them. And I really want you to notice just how true it is that the kingdom of God is this intervening force to where life normally wants to take us. Let's look. Start off here with some of these travels. You see a map here for some of these places. This, by the way, over there on the far right, that's modern day Turkey. Over there on the left, that's modern day Greece. And you see some of the places we're gonna talk about. From Troas, this is Paul, Silas, Luke, and their entourage. We put out to sea and sailed straight for Samothrace. And the next day we went on to Neapolis. From there we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony and the leading city of the district of Macedonia, way up there north of Greece. And we stayed there several days. On the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river where we expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak with the women who had gathered there. I just need you to know this isn't unconventional. This is kind of a turn from normal convention of how biblical faith worked. In the Old Testament, the men were the people who were taught. They were the recipients of the faith. And then they would go home and they would teach their families. They would teach the women. Here in the New Testament, Jesus has changed things. Now these apostles are going out and they're looking for a place of prayer. They encounter a bunch of women and they begin to speak to these women. They begin to tell them the truth about who Jesus is. It's a new day for how the gospel goes forward, how the good news of God goes forward. And it demonstrates that God shows no favoritism. It goes on. One of those women listening was a very important woman. She's going to be important to us later. Was a woman from the city of Thyatira named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. She was a worshiper of God. This means that she was not an official Jewish person. She had not gone through all the rites of conversion, but she believed that the God of the Old Testament was the true God, but she does not yet know who Jesus is. The Lord opened Lydia's heart to respond to Paul's message. And when she and the members of her household were baptized, It's going to be important later. She invited us to her home. If you consider me a believer in the Lord, she said, come and stay at my house. And she persuaded us. Now, it can be easy when we see this about Lydia, this woman who comes to faith and then says, I want to have you over for a meal, opens up her home. It's easy to imagine that Lydia is kind of like a Susie homemaker type person. But that's not the case. I also want to say there's nothing wrong with being a Susie homemaker type person. Or a Sam homemaker type person, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes we read the Bible, and especially when it comes to women, we assume that every woman we meet is a domesticated kind of, house wife kind of person, but that's not who Lydia is. So what we learn about Lydia is that Lydia, she's this dealer in purple cloth, she's a powerful businesswoman. She's very wealthy. In fact, what we see here about Lydia is that Lydia seems to be the head of her household. And the reason we know that is because when she is baptized, all the members of her household are baptized with her. We should not take this to mean that suddenly every member of her household, that includes family, that includes children, that includes servants, we shouldn't take that to mean that they immediately come to believe in Jesus. But in the ancient world, what happens is when the head of the house, the head of a state, the head of a country says, this is what I believe, everyone else goes, okay, us too. They go along with it, they submit to it, and they begin to learn, and they put themselves under the submission of that God. What this shows us is that Lydia was a powerful businesswoman, a powerful merchant, very wealthy. She was the head of her household so that when she comes to believe in Jesus, her whole household goes, okay, if that's what she believes, we're on board too. Now, Lydia is going to be important later. She's really critical to everything that happens, but now we're going to pivot to another part of the story now. Once when again, this is Paul, Silas, and then Luke, the one who's writing these words down. Once when we were going to the place of prayer, this is another time there in Philippi, we were met by a female slave who had a spirit by which she predicted the future. She earned a great deal of money for her owners by fortune telling. Just think about the despair here for a minute. Think about the hopelessness of this woman who's a slave. She's in economic slavery. Not only that, but she's afflicted by a spirit, an evil spirit that causes her to predict the future. But she's totally trapped because although she's in misery, she's making money for her owners. Think about the despair and hopelessness, the loneliness and the isolation that this woman is experiencing. We go on. So she followed Paul and the rest of the disciples shouting, these men are servants of the Most High God who are telling you the way to be saved. And she kept this up for many days. Finally, Paul became so annoyed. Annoyance is biblical, right? Parents, summer vacation, kids in the back seat, Don't hurt them, but it's okay to be annoyed with them. Finally, Paul became so annoyed that he turned around and said to the spirit, in the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to come out of her. At that moment, the spirit left her. Great news for this woman, right? Someone who's under affliction and in this hopeless place. But watch this, when her owners realized that their hope of making money was gone, right? They now fall into despair, but theirs is an unjust kind of despair because they're abusing this woman. They seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to face the authorities. And here's what they said. They brought them before the magistrates and they said, these men and Jews are throwing our city into an uproar. No, they're not, right? They just freed this woman. They did an act of mercy, but it's costing you now, and you're facing economic ruin. So they're adding in all of this stuff that isn't true. They're doing this by advocating customs unlawful for us Romans to accept or practice, right? They're breaking Roman law. And even the crowds joined in the attack against Paul and Silas, and the magistrates ordered them to be stripped and beaten with rods. How unfair is this? Right? These guys just set a woman free. They weren't even looking for trouble. She was following them for days. They set her free. And now they're being severely beaten. After they'd been severely flogged, they were thrown into prison. And the jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. Have you ever suffered for doing good? Right? You try to do what's right. You try to do what's honorable or godly. You try to do something kind and you end up suffering for it. I mean, there are few things in life that'll take you to a place of despair, of hopelessness. You're just like, why bother? These guys do something good and people lie and they get beaten within an inch of their life, 39 lashes. They're thrown into prison. The jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. When he received these orders, he not only put them in an outer cell, but he put them in the inner cell, make sure that they didn't get out, and he fastened their feet in the stocks. About midnight, I don't know about you, but the middle of the night, waking up at midnight, or for me it's like 3 a.m., my mind starts going, and all the problems of the day come back on me. And at midnight or 3 a.m., man, that is a dark time of the mind, isn't it? Like suddenly everything feels heavy and overwhelming and hopeless. At midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. They're in this place of complete despair, midnight, locked in jail for something that was just ridiculous. They're beaten within an inch of their lives. Suddenly, there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken. At once, all the prison doors flew open and everyone's chains came loose. Now the jailer woke up, and when he saw the prison doors were open, he drew his sword and he was about to kill himself because he thought the prisoners had escaped. This would be seen as a dereliction of duty. He was ordered not to let the prisoners escape. He'd likely be executed for this, and so he's gonna beat them to the punch. So this jailer now, the despair is traveling, right? The jailer now looks and he thinks, oh my gosh, my life is over. He falls to a place of utter hopelessness. He's thinking about committing suicide. But here's what happens next. But Paul intervenes. Paul shouted, don't harm yourself, we're all here. The jailer called for lights, rushed in, and fell trembling before Paul and Silas. He then brought them out and asked, sirs, what must I do to be saved? They replied, believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved, you and your household. Again, this household idea that he's the head of household. So this is a faith that will permeate their whole household. Believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved. Now, if you missed last week's message, AJ Mastick did a great job talking about this. We battle about what it takes to be saved or what it means to be saved. Part of the problem is when we hear saved, we think about life after death only, and that is a part of it. We're missing the part of being saved that matters for the here and now. Being saved from a life of disintegration, being saved from despair and loneliness, and being brought into the whole life of Jesus. So they spoke the word of the Lord to the jailer and to all the others in his house. And at that hour of the night, the jailer took them and washed their wounds. Then immediately he and his household were baptized. The jailer brought them into his house and he set a meal before them. What a great change of fortune, right? They're locked in jail and now they're being served a meal. The guy's taking care of them, washing their wounds. He was filled with joy now. And this man who was about to commit suicide a few moments ago is now filled with joy because he came to believe in God, he and his whole household. When it was daylight, the magistrates sent their officers to the jailer with the order, release those men. And the jailer told Paul, the magistrates have ordered you and Silas to be released. Now you can leave. Please go in peace. But I love this. This is where Paul gets a little salty. He's like, okay, wait a minute. But Paul said to the officers, they beat us publicly without a trial, even though, and here's the moment where he drops it, even though we are Roman citizens. See, not everyone living in the region was a Roman citizen. It was a thing that only certain people had. It was a place of privilege. And Paul now lets them know that, hey, we're not just Jewish guys, we're Roman citizens. And they threw us into prison. And now do they want us to get rid of us? Or now do they want to get rid of us so quietly? No, let them come themselves and they can escort us out of town. The officers reported this to the magistrates, and when they heard that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens, in other words, they had violated their civil rights, they were alarmed. And they came to appease them and escorted them from the prison, requesting them to leave the city. Now notice this, back to where we started. After Paul and Silas came out of all of this stuff, after they came out of the prison, where did they go? They went to Lydia's house, where they met with the brothers and sisters. That's a way of saying the church. They met with the church and encouraged them. Then they left. Now, there's a lot there. But do you see how at every step along the way, despair, hopelessness, loneliness, and isolation are coming at the people of God? And do you notice how at every step, God won't let it land? By his Spirit through his people, God keeps intervening in the natural trajectory of life, and he brings people to joy and hope and life again. You see, that is the power that Jesus still has today. That's what his Spirit can do. And this, what we see in Acts, is not just stuff that happened a long time ago and we look at it and go, wow, this is the stuff that God still wants to do within his church today. This is exactly what the church of Jesus still exists for today. See, here at Pathfinder, one of the things that we say about ourselves is that we're all about inspiring connections. We're all about connecting people to the things that will inspire them. That word inspire means to have breath or to have spirit in you. If the natural trajectory of life is to take you to a place of isolation and despair, then what our world needs more than ever is someone to inspire them, to keep them connected to the things that will keep them in hope, to keep them connected to one another. That's in addition to the things we're talking about in this series, like unconditional acceptance and a true life approach, and next week, a God-directed journey. See, we here at Pathfinder are all about connecting people to the things that will keep you not in a place of despair or loneliness, but that will keep you inspired for living. Now, what are those things? Well, Jesus said it's pretty simple. The connections that we need most, the connections that will give us inspiration for living, are none other than being connected to God and other people. Maybe you remember that Jesus said that the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the next greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. Now, you could look at those as just saying, man, those are the most important things. Those are the things that God wants you to do. That's what good people do. But it's not the greatest commandment just because those are the right things to do. A connection to God and a connection to people, those sources of connection are also sources of immense power in your life to overcome the natural trajectory of life in this world. Think about it. Those moments in life when you are most connected to other people, when your connections are rich and deep and intimate, you can survive anything, right? Those moments when you're connected to God, when you're so close to God, when your relationship is tight and you're talking to God and you sense his presence in your life, it doesn't matter what the world throws at you in those moments, am I right? You find within yourself a wellspring of life that will keep you moving forward, that will keep you living with joy and hope and expectation. See, here at Pathfinder, we say that we're all about inspiring connections because we know the natural trajectory of life is to leave us broken and alone and without hope. And yet, if we can keep people connected to God himself and to each other, we know there's sources of immense power in those things. But here's the thing. This isn't a series ultimately about Pathfinder Church. This is a series about you as fellow Pathfinders on your journey through life, just like Paul and Silas and Luke and Lydia from long ago. And so for you, I want you just to think about this for a second. You know this in your own life. You know what it's like to be connected in rich relationship with people or God. And you know that when you're going through something hard, this is my thing right now. When you're going through something hard, you know that's the only thing that can take the despair away. But I also want you to think about this. As you move through life, how focused are you on inspiring connections with others? As you move through life, how big of a priority is it for you to look around for the people who are at the brink of despair, who are in isolation, and to connect them to the things that will keep them from going to that dark place? How skilled are you at connecting people to the things that inspire the most? How committed are you to turning back the tides of despair and isolation that are natural in our world? See, the lesson of Acts is not only that there is a God of power, a spirit of power at work in the world. The lesson of Acts is that through normal people like us, Pathfinders like us, people just trying to find our way through life, trying to find our way to wholeness ourselves, the story of Acts is that God can work through us and the lives of other people to intervene against the natural trajectory of things to bring people to a place of life and hope. See, that's the story of Lydia. Notice the moment that this woman gets connected to Jesus, the first thing she does is she starts providing space for people to connect to each other. She opens up her home. She provides out of her own resources for the church to begin to gather. Silas and Paul, they get out of prison. Where do they go? They go to Lydia's house because that's where the church has taken up meeting. She's the campus pastor of the church of Philippi. Yeah, Paul and Silas are the teachers, but she is the center of that community. She made herself the center. And I think from Lydia, we get a picture of what this can look like, and I think we also get a picture of why so often we don't make room for this in our lives. For me, when I hear this message, I get to a place of overwhelm. I know it's true, and I know that part of my life's mission should be to look around the world and to help connect people. A world full of people who are on the brink of despair and isolated and lonely. I know that should be my mission, but immediately I say to myself, gosh, I don't know that I have time. I don't know that I have emotional energy. I don't know that I have room in my relationships to get connected to more people. Part of the reason is because I know something called the Dunbar Number. It's been a lot of years since I've shared this with you. This graphic, I'll explain it in a second. It's a graphic that explains the kinds of relationships we're capable of having. It's put together by an anthropologist in the 1990s by the name of Robin Dunbar. I think he's British. And he studied people, he studied mammals, and he studied brain development, and he came up with this number. The number is 150. He said, we are really only capable of having about 150 relationships in our lives. That's all our brains can handle. And by 150 relationships, he's talking about people that you know pretty well, you know them by face, you know them by name, you have some shared history. And if you think about it, if you've ever planned a wedding for yourself or for one of your kids, you kind of know how quickly the guest list can balloon to 300 or 400 people. That's probably because Robin Dunbar's onto something. You start thinking about all the people you know, all the people you'd want to be there for your special day, and it's somewhere right around 150. From there, these relationships become more intimate. So these are people that you know and you're a little closer to. Maybe they're people that you would have for a big anniversary party that you wanted to celebrate. Not 150. These get a little more intimate. Then you get to 15, and this is probably more like your inner circle, your close friends. These are the people you'd go on a vacation with. Aren't many people I'd go on a vacation with. Maybe there are 15, and maybe that's true in your life. And then 5, these are your intimates. These are the people that you would call to bail you out of jail, that you would confess deep, hard sins to or secrets to. These are the people who tend to know everything about you. He says our brains are only wired to have about 5 of these connections. That's all we can manage. From here, these are more acquaintances, people you might recognize by name or face. You don't know a lot about them. These are up here. This is like your Facebook friends. You're like, who is that person again? I can't even remember. Maybe I know them somehow, right? So the point of all of this is that our brains are wired only for a certain amount of connection. How many relationships can I manage? The bottom line I take from the Dunbar Number is not many. And so for me, I hear this, but as a guy who feels overwhelmed with all of the responsibilities on me, all of the relationships that I already have that I'm trying to maintain, and I'm a guy who values depth in relationship. I want deeper relationships, so I'm not willing to sacrifice depth for more. This message feels overwhelming to me. And if it feels overwhelming to you, I want to offer you something that I think can help. Part of the lesson here may be that we need to reorder our lives, that relationships matter more than we think, and in fact they do. In terms of things that you can do, positive things that you can do to steward your health. I told you how chronic loneliness is one of the worst things you can experience for your health outcomes. The flip side is true. Cultivating healthy, deep, intimate relationships is the best thing you can do for your long-term health and happiness in life. So maybe part of the message today is, yeah, this is hard to do, but maybe I need to reorder where I'm putting some of my time and energy, give some more effort to things that will have greater return for me and the people around me. But not only that, I want to show you something else. If you feel overwhelmed, if you feel like your relational rings are already full in life, and you're hearing this and you go, okay, I get it, but how am I supposed to be a part? How am I supposed to be like Lydia and connect more people? How does this work? I want to share with you something I learned from a book probably 6 or 7 years ago, a book called Tribal Leadership. This has been one of the greatest books that I've read about people leadership. The subtitle is Leveraging Natural Groups to Build a Thriving Organization. The lessons of this book still stay with me. And one of the lessons of this book is an explanation of how most good leaders lead. The book talks about how most good leaders lead with something called dyads, or dyadic relationships, two-way relationships. So if I'm the leader, this is my org chart. If I'm a very good leader, what this means is that I've got this group of people around me, and I foster relationships with each and every one of them. We have one-on-ones. We talk about goal setting. I help them with their problems. I coach them. I mentor them. I pour into them. I may have hard conversations with them that help them get back on track. Most good leaders do this kind of thing. They cultivate relationships with their people. And as a result, in an org chart, if you know anything about organizational science, a leader can only have so many people reporting to them directly and to still be a good leader to them. So for me, this is what I did. I tried to cultivate great relationships with the people I led. But here's what I learned in tribal leadership: that the greatest organizational leaders of our time, and actually throughout time, the greatest organizational leaders don't practice this method of dyads. They learn to leverage triads. What they do is they learn how not only to cultivate relationships directly with their people, some of that's necessary, but they become masters of helping their people and the people around them connect to each other. They build these webs of connection where people not only have a great boss who's gonna help them out, but they have a great team around them whom they can turn to for help and guidance and support and all the things that we need. See, the greatest leaders of our time learn that in order to connect people, to work against the forces of despair and isolation, it doesn't have to be a connection to them. They learn how to connect people to each other. And notice that's exactly what Lydia did. She's this big, important lady, has a big job, just as busy as any of us. And what she does is she doesn't go out and start making a bunch of new friends. Instead, she opens up her home, she provides from her resources, she creates space for people to connect to each other. And really, when we talk about inspiring connections, that's the thing that you can take hold of today. It's not that you have to connect more people to you. You just have to be available to set the table, to create space for people to connect to each other. Think of yourself more as a matchmaker or a wingman. You are not the Bachelorette, even though there are two of them now. You're not either one, right? The way you help people find connection to others is by opening your home. But you don't have to be at the center of all of it. You just create the space. It's maybe hosting a neighborhood barbecue. Maybe you host a pop-up here at Pathfinder, these social events that we do just to bring people together. You don't have to connect to everyone there. Sure, be nice to them, but you're setting the table for connection to happen around you. It doesn't have to be all about you. Hanging in church after the service in the lobby or down in the commons means you don't have to get in exhausting long conversations with people, especially if you're an introvert. It means that you can talk to someone and then immediately introduce someone to someone else. They can start talking. You can walk away while they're still talking and you can go to brunch. Sounds nice, doesn't it? See, that's what it means to be a connector. And the reality is this is the same thing that happens when we connect people to God. In some churches, there is an enormous amount of pressure on every person to know how to bring people to Christ. And while I think that's a calling some of us have, I don't think that's a calling that everyone should feel, but everyone should feel the burden to set the table, to set the stage for God to introduce himself to people. God's pretty good at that. Sometimes we just need to set the stage. It's as easy as inviting people to join you at a service project like Missions Week or an event here at church, a weekend service, an action team. That may just mean peppering your conversations with some deeper topics than the weather or sports or travel or politics. See, to inspire connections doesn't mean that you have to be at the center of it all, exhausting yourself with more connections than you can manage. This is good news for those of us who are exhausted, who are maybe a little more introverted, or people who already have full relational rings. To close, let me just quickly illustrate what this looks like, okay? To be people who inspire connections, what this looks like from some Pathfinders that I've known here. The first I'll tell you about is my wife, Jocelyn. She is a natural connector. And Jocelyn, she doesn't boast about much, but there are moments in life where she will boast. And the thing that she boasts most about is we'll be somewhere, we'll sometimes be at church, we'll be out somewhere, and she'll see two people, and she'll lean over at me, and she'll say, I introduced those two. I met her, and I just knew they'd be great friends, and I introduced them, and look, they're friends now. Isn't that awesome? See, that's what it means to inspire connection. Or I think about a guy who was on staff here years ago. His name's Spencer Paraguay, the guy over here. He was a principal here. Anyone remember Spencer? Spencer was a great leader. He was principal when I moved here and when my kids were enrolling here. And shortly after we got here, Spencer invited us over for dinner. And when we showed up for dinner, there were two other couples who were there. And those couples had kids around our age. And I didn't realize at first what he was doing, but I saw over the course of the night as Spencer and his wife Rhonda, who were a bit older than us, they just kind of backed off. They played host to allow the three of us, the three couples, to connect. And it's amazing, after that one dinner, we fostered connections with both of those couples. They remained friends for years. One of them has moved away to the other side of the state. We're still friends with them today. All because of one dinner. Or I think about this guy, his name's Adam Schlueter. His folks, he grew up here, his folks still go to church here. Adam is a world traveler. He's traveled all around the world. He's also a photographer. One time when he was in Mexico, he met this guy who'd been a world traveler his whole life. This guy was much older. And he said to Adam, Adam, as you travel the world, you're gonna encounter so many beautiful things, beautiful landscapes. You're gonna see sights that you just will never forget. He's like, but I'll tell you, when you get near the end of your life, the thing you will remember most, above all, the thing you will remember most are the people you met. And that changed Adam's perspective as he traveled through the world. He started taking pictures of people and learning their stories, and he met people all over the world. Well, then he settled down in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And it was a place he didn't have a lot of relationships. In fact, a relationship ended and he was lonely. And he started looking around the city and he realized there were all kinds of other people who were disconnected. And so Adam took a page out of his mother's book. His mother used to host these Monday night family dinners. And Adam thought, what would it be like for me to host Monday night family dinners as a single guy? I don't know that he's very good at cooking, but he started going around the town and bank tellers and people at the gas station and perfect strangers on the street. He would say, I'm having a dinner at my house this Monday. Feel free to bring something, just come along, we're gonna connect. And Adam says the first time that he did it, he was like, I don't know if anyone's gonna show up. 11 people, total strangers, showed up. Before the pandemic put a kibosh on everything, he had 80 people gathered in his yard. 80 people hungry for connection. Now, Adam will tell you, he's got a TED Talk where he talks about this. Adam will tell you that he's an introvert. This stuff doesn't work naturally for him, but he realizes the power, not in directly connecting to everybody, but creating space for people to connect to each other. It's not that difficult when you simply create space. See, I don't know what kind of person you are, but here's what I know. I know that the natural trajectory of things in the world is to take us to a place of despair and loneliness. I know it because I'm battling it every day right now. But I also know that there is one solution, and that is a deep connection to God himself and a deep connection to other people. And the role we can play is by being people who are willing to set the table. See, the same power that lived in Paul and Silas and Lydia, it lives in you and it lives in me. We've got the power to connect people. So let's do it. Our world needs us more than ever. Let's pray. God in heaven, thank you for coming to pursue us. I thank you that Jesus didn't, in his ministry here on earth, just run to the connected, to the important. But he was on the borders, he was on the fringes, he was going to the exiles, the forgotten, the forsaken. And he was inviting them into connection, to life. God, I'm thankful for the testimony of Acts that shows that that's what Jesus is still doing by his Spirit in the church today. God, for any of us here right now today, anyone listening to this, anyone battling against hopelessness, anyone who is feeling isolated and lonely, God, I pray that first of all, you would press in by your Spirit and you would find us right where we are and you would breathe life into us. That you would collide with the natural trajectory of things, God, that you would intervene, that you'd breathe your Spirit of life and joy and hope back into us. But God, I pray that you would also, for every person listening to this, convict us as we move through the world, not to be so caught up in the other things of life that we forget to notice those who are also gasping for breath, who are running out of hope, who are isolated and disconnected and lonely. God, that you would give us eyes to see them, and you would give us hearts that believe that we've, through pretty simple action, got something that we can do to help change the trajectory of this world. God, if that's overwhelming to us, if that's scary for us, talk us out of it, snap us out of it, show us that we can do so little to affect so much. God, give us eyes to see the opportunities ahead of us. Lead us by your Spirit, just in the same way that you led Lydia and Paul and Silas to be agents of hope and connection, of life and inspiration in a world that's desperate. I pray this in the powerful name of Jesus. Amen.
Thank you for joining us and being a part of our online Pathfinder community. If you're new, you can find helpful links to resources in the description below or at pathfinderstl.org. While you're there, you can also find our message podcasts, which allow you to listen to the weekend messages on the go. So if you're out and about, you'll never miss out on a message. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you'd like to see more content from us. We enjoyed worshiping with you today, and we hope to see you next week. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. And that's all I have this morning. Have a blessed week.